Now, next we have another wonderful session by Abhishek Doshi. He's a Google developer expert and he's also a senior Flutter developer, Somnio software company. Okay, so his today's topic is staging or production. Use the same build using Firebase Remote Config. So, without taking much ado, I will bring him on the stage with me so that we can chat a bit and then move ahead. So, hey Abhishek, how are you?
Hey Shri, how are you? I'm great.
Yeah, Abhishek, excited for the talk?
Yeah, very much.
Yes, so I hope you have started your screen share and I will get you on the stage. I'm really excited for your talk.
Perfect. So, hello everyone. I hope you're doing good. So, today's topic is mainly focused on remote config, and remote config is first of all like who am I? I am a Google developer expert for Dart, Flutter, and Firebase. I am also the organizer of Flutter Valsar, co-organizer of Flutter India, and I write articles on Flutter, Dart, and Firebase. Currently, I work as senior Flutter engineer at Somnio Software. So, yep. So basically, Firebase remote config is one of the most wonderful feature that I feel provided by Firebase. It's like my favorite feature you can say for from Firebase. And what exactly is the problem? So whoever is working with flavors, so whenever we want to develop a feature, we use the development flavor. And let's suppose that if you want to test it, if you want to provide it to your QA tester, so you can use the staging flavor. And when you have to deliver the build to your client, you will have to move your application to production flavor, right? And based on each flavor, you will have a separate API URLs and API keys. So it takes a lot of time when we have to create build, especially for iOS, because it takes like really a lot of time if your device or your platform is not that good configured. So iOS builds usually takes a lot of time compared to Android, and creating multiple builds is also a tiring process. I really hate creating builds because it's like I can't do anything else when I'm creating builds. So what if I say that you can use same build for staging, development, and production? What you can do is you can use remote config for this. You just need to enable remote config from your Firebase console, and you can add a key value pair to it, where the key can be flavor and the value can be whatever flavor you have. So you can have like dev, staging, production, etc. And then you can fetch that key value pair in your application, maybe on splash screen on or whenever, which is the first screen of your application. You can fetch the key value pair on that particular screen, and then you can use that key value pair or the value, especially you can use that value to determine which flavor your application would be in. So that's enough. Like, I don't create much PPTs. I don't like documentations a lot. I don't like theory part a lot. So let's do some real stuff. So let me quickly get the VS Code. Okay. So currently I have just configured this particular project with Firebase. I haven't added any particular code. Like if you see, it's just main.dart, the basic main.dart file. And this is the Firebase options that is by default generated when you use Flutterfire CLI to register your application with Firebase. And that's pretty much, I haven't done any coding yet. So what we are going to do is today we would be creating a environment variable in Firebase for remote config, which would be flavor, and based on that flavor we would actually just print out the flavor. So what I have done is I have created this .env file. It's just a simple .env file where the key is prod, and I am just going to send out hello prod, staging, hello staging, dev, hello dev. So instead of this, you can actually add here the API URLs that you want. So prod equal to your prod URL, staging equal to your staging URL. Same way for dev. And I have added the required packages, that is our Firebase core, Firebase remote config. Whenever you add remote config, you will have to add Firebase analytics as well. and the .env package, flutter underscore .env package, to use this .env file. So let's first start with creating our remote config part. So let's go to our Firebase console, and I have created the basic project, and on the left panel in the end we have this remote config. If you go to remote config, you will get this particular landing page, or whatever you can say, welcome page. Create configuration parameter name, let's add it as flavor, and you can keep it as string, number, boolean, json, whatever you want, and default value, let's keep it as dev, and save it. Once it is saved, it would be in draft. You need to publish these changes. So let's publish it, and yeah, that's it. So you can see we have created one configuration variable, that is flavor, with its value as dev. It provides how much percentage fetch percentage basically. So yeah, that's it. The configuration is just this much. So let's now see how you can actually use Firebase remote config with your application. So first of all, let me just delete everything, and yeah, what I'm going to do is I would just create a home class, home file you can say, which is home.dart, and create a stateful widget over here. Stateful widget because I'm going to fetch the remote config part when in the init state of this class. And here I would just use the home widget that we just created. Now let me just return default. Okay, so I have just created like the home page, which is nothing, just a center text. The text is also an empty string. So now let us create a remote config service file, remote config, and let's create a class in it and a static method which would fetch our remote config. Fetch, let's name it as fetch config. And here you would actually have to first, you will have to what we say, initialize your remote config. So let me just do that. So we have the Firebase remote config package itself. So it's Firebase remote config. So I just took the instance of the Firebase remote config, and the next step would be to set the default set configuration settings. So remote config dot set configuration settings, and in configuration settings we need to provide basically what all things you want, that is the fetch time interval and the minimum fetch interval, fetch timeout and minimum fetch interval. So there is a class called remote configuration where you can actually provide remote config settings, where you can actually provide the entire thing. So you can see like it takes two parameters, fetch timeout and minimum fetch interval. They both are duration values. Let me just first format it. Okay, so you can see this is maximum duration to wait for a response when fetching configuration from the remote config server defaults to 1 minute. So let's just give it maybe few seconds. No, I think minutes would be a good option. 2 minutes. And minimum fetch interval is you can see the cache timing of the config variable. So it says maximum age of cached config before it is considered stale defaults to 12 hours. So what it happens is, let's suppose if you are not providing this minimum fetch interval, or if you are just providing it as the default one, that is 12 hours, uh, if you are changing the configuration right now in the Firebase console, it won't be reflected on your application. It would only be reflected after 12 hours. So that's not something we would actually write. we would actually like. So I would just give it as 1 second. So I want it to be changed as soon as I change it in the database. Now, once we set the configuration, the next step is to activate the remote config parameters that we have. So it's like fetch and activate. And next is to fetch the actual value. So we have, if you see, we have get all, get bool, get double, get int, get string, get value, etc. So as we know that our remote config considers just a string value, so we would be using it, and here we have to provide the key. So this would actually return a string type. So let's just return this and change the return variable. This is a future bool, so let's await it. This is also a future. Perfect. So you can see our function is like pretty small. I guess just 13 lines with formatting. But what we have done is we first took the instance of remote config, then we set the configuration settings, in which mainly we need to set the minimum fetch interval so that we can immediately see the effects of changes done in the Firebase console. Next step is to fetch and activate the remote config, and last is to get what value we want. That is, a get the value of the key that is provided to the get string function. So let's so whenever we want to use Firebase, we need to first initialize it. We need to initialize it before the run app function. So let me quickly do that particular part. And if you remember, we have used this .env file. So here, whenever you want to use a .env file, you need to load that particular file. So load that can be loaded in main function itself. So we would just Firebase dot initialize app and provide the default options for the current platform. So this particular part, that is default Firebase option dot current platform, is actually available from this Firebase options folder. You can see this default Firebase option dot current platform, which is created using the Flutter Fire CLI, which is like really good, because in recent update of Flutter in Google I/O, now Firebase officially supports Flutter with a particular tag where you can directly add your Flutter application to Firebase without separately adding your Flutter, without separately adding each platform applications. And the next would be, we have a .env variable which would load our .env file. This is actually from the package that we included, flutter underscore .env. So we just need to use .env.load. If you see, the file name is by default to .env, and that's the reason I just created the .env file over here. And you need to add that .env file to your assets as your asset. That's it. So next is, I need to print the value which is available in .env based on the flavor from remote config. So if I repeat this thing, the key of this .env is available in remote config. We need to fetch that key from remote config, map that key with the .env file to get this particular value, that is hello prod, hello staging, hello dev, etc. So for that, let's create a variable called string message, give it a null value of empty string, and pass it to our text widget, sorry. Next is to create an init state. Here we would actually call this fetch config method, but as it returns future string, we can't await a method in init state. It is not allowed. So we would just create a separate method over here, which would void fetch data, which will ultimately call the remote config file service. You can see my GitHub Copilot is so smart. and this actually provides us a value message equal to await. Once we get this message, we just need to set state it so that it gets updated for this particular part. And let's call this method fetch data. I guess that's it for the code. Let's quickly run this. And there we go. I hope it runs without any issues. So let me just till this thing is running. Let me just summarize it. What we did, we first enabled remote config on Firebase console. Then we added a remote config, and it failed. No Firebase app. I actually called the initialize part, right? And you can see here it is just printing dev. Let me just increase the size. And yeah, you can see this actually is just printing the remote config key value pair value that we are fetching. So now it's time to use this value to map with .env file. So this would not assign to the message. We have a method in .env called .env.get, and this takes a key, and this would be assigned to our message. And now you can see, let me hot restart it. Yeah, you can see hello dev is visible. Now let me just quickly update things in Firebase console. So you can just update it to prod and save it, publish it, and hot restart your application. So you can see it's now visible hello prod. So this is just a small example. What you can do is you can just update your URLs over here. So whenever in your splash screen, you can just write, you can just fetch this particular URL based on the remote config value that you have set. And now you don't need to create multiple builds, because the same build would be able to deliver your dev, staging, and prod environment. With just you just need to change the value from the remote config. So let's suppose you want to deliver a build to your to your another developer for just internal testing. So you can just mark the flavor as dev and create a build. Now if that build looks good to everyone, you can use that particular build to send it to your tester and update the flavor to staging. And then when your application would run, it would fetch the staging URL. And once it is perfect, without any bugs, which is actually not possible, but still, so in that case, you can just update your remote config value with prod, and your application would fetch the URL of production whenever it is run. So I guess that was it from my end. Let me check. And yeah, I guess that was it from my end. Feel free to get in touch with me on Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, GitHub, Medium, etc., 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 with the same username, Abhishek Doshi 26. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask right now. If you are, very shy of not questioning in public, feel free to send me a text over any social media.
Hey Abhishek.
Hello.
Yeah, it was a lovely session. I've been using Firebase from a long time and never knew that we could do this with Firebase as well. So after this event, I'm going to try my hands-on experience with remote config and Firebase stuff. So we have
Yeah,
few questions. I'll just yeah.
not just this, like you can use remote config for multiple use cases. This was just one use case for creating same build. But let's suppose that you're working on a feature, and your project, you have completed that feature, but now your client changes the requirements and he says that I don't want to deliver this particular feature right now. Okay, so what you can do is you would just wrap that particular entry point with visibility widget, and make it as false, visible false. But
Yeah.
what if you then, whenever the client says that I want to deliver it now, you will have to again create a build. But in same way, you
Yes.
can use remote config. You can specify the key as the feature name and value as false or true, and use that particular in your application. So dynamically you would actually be able to deliver updates as well. This is one more
Oh,
use case.
yes.
Another use case is, if you want to change your font entirely, you all of you would have seen that many times Twitter changes the font without even updating our application. Even Instagram does this. So what you can do is you can just add the font name in remote config and fetch that in your application. So based on whenever your application is launched, new font would be available whenever you change it in the remote config.
This is really nice. So it is kind of a mini server driven UI, right? We
Yeah,
can do that as
exactly.
well.
Yes.
Yes. So we have a few questions. So I'll just bring them on. Just a moment. Yeah, you can see how do you manage testing and CI with Firebase Remote Config.
So if you want to particularly use CI for this remote config, I would just suggest to create multiple CI based on the value of the remote config, multiple pipelines. Let's suppose that if you are using GitHub Actions, so it would be beneficial to just check the value of the remote config and then run that particular pipeline. And testing as well, you can just mock remote config using Mockito and check the value. That is one option. The second option is you can actually, instead of using it's just a variable, right? You are just updating a variable, so you can locally also test it without using remote config.
Okay. Uh, nice explanation. We have one more question over here. Can fetch interval be that short? 1 second on example. I believe that Firebase throttles too frequent queries and you will get an error if you superpass quota.
Yeah, if you surpass quota, you will get an error that you have been blocked for, I guess, 24 hours or something like that. But
Yeah.
yeah, for remote config, that is not the case, because this is something for configuration part. So it doesn't surpass the quota if it doesn't actually block a user. But what would happen is, if you continuously use this 1 second part for your entire application, the duration between which the request would be fulfilled, that would be increased, but it won't throw any error. That's sure.
Okay. I have one personal question in this as well. Let's say we have some Firestore node database that we have in our application. So can we change that data as well through the remote config that we are doing?
mm, I didn't exactly understand. Can you explain more about it?
So let's see, we have a Firebase node and we have some database that we are calling, but currently due to some feature, I am not able to, or I don't want to call that data right now. But then afterwards, let's say some feature that we enable, and then I just want that remote config to assign that data into our application. So can that be done?
Yeah, so what you can do is you can create a cloud function for this. Your cloud function would
Okay.
first fetch the data from Firebase, and it will also fetch the data from your remote config. Now, if remote config has the value as true, you can assign a new variable to remote config that would be just a data and a JSON file.
Okay.
That is one
So
option.
it's
The other
done.
option can be based on that feature variable. If
Yeah.
the feature variable is true, you would call that particular database from your application directly. So you would be using that particular variable at two places. One would be for visibility part, and the other would be for your data part.
Okay. Yeah. So that was my doubt and it was cleared. Thank you, Abhishek, for your time. I had a wonderful session with you and hope we can connect again sometime in future. Okay.
Sure. Perfect.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.